Why, in your mind, risk management and scenario planning is important for today's world? What kind of trends and risks and drivers you see rising currently?
Well, risk management is part of building successful companies, not just because you want to avoid disasters, but also because you want to make the right decisions. And in order to make the right decisions, you need to be able to weigh different alternatives. And then you need to understand risk. There's risk in success, and you need to understand it, and you need to be methodical about that. But today, if we just think about sort of more traditional risk thinking, the world is more uncertain than it probably has ever been before. And
True.
I'd like to say that, or claim that never before has it been as likely that if you have a single plan, it will fail because you had the wrong assumptions. There are huge trends on their way that may disrupt life as we know it. So how could you just make a single plan under these circumstances? You really shouldn't. You should make a number of plans based on different assumptions. And then you should track on a regular basis how those assumptions change or what you know about those assumptions change. And then you can understand which scenario from your business's point of view or your country's point of view is now the most likely, and what you should do to mitigate the risks in that scenario, and what can you do to maximize the benefits.
Exactly. And often it seems like that you should have multiple plans, but also understand, like you said, the assumptions behind it and the scenarios driving those essential assumptions that you make for your plan. And more often than not, the most likely scenario is mixture of many different kinds of scenarios, very bad ones and very nice ones. But the reality is messy. That's why it's very important to try to understand also the different scenarios and assess them and follow them and really think of the impact to your own organization.
And that's actually exactly one of the biggest reasons to do scenario planning, because it's a training exercise. One way to think about it is, sort of, you imagine yourself standing on a high hill, and you know that there's a large valley in front of you, but it's pitch black. You don't see anything, but you know that there's a valley, and you know that you need to cross that valley on your entrepreneurial journey.
Mm-hmm. That's how it feels like every now and then.
That's a very typical feeling. I know that very well. And you see one lit path crossing the valley. That's your plan. And you think that this is the way I will cross that valley. But you don't see anything else in the valley. You don't know whether there are rivers, whether there are mountains,
Wow.
whether there are high cliffs, wild animals, you name it. You don't know. You don't see anything.
Yeah.
If you try to create a few scenarios on how I can cross that valley, you can think of that as seeing several lit paths crossing the valley, and you actually see an overview of the countryside, of the terrain in the valley, which means that no matter which path you will be following, you are better prepared to engage and react to whatever will happen, because you know that there's a river. It looks deep.
Yeah.
There's clearly a pride of lions over there.
Yeah.
And your people will know that as well.
Exactly.
Because when you do the scenario, people will train their minds. Okay, if that would happen, then these are the actions we should take. And at least they are quicker to take them. They are more agile in reacting to surprises. So it's really a training exercise.
Very interesting, yeah. Some time ago you mentioned that this sort of scenario assessments energizes staff. That was a very interesting point to me, and I feel the same that when we are looking eye to eye the problems and challenges and risks That's actually empowering and energizing exercise for all, because then you're not unconsciously or somewhat else sort of hiding certain topics, etc. It's burdensome. It takes energy out of you if you try to avoid risks consciously or unconsciously. Then again, you start thinking in this world that all of the businesses will be disrupted at some point, probably due to automation and machine learning, etc.
And that's a really good point, because that's closer to the, let's say, strategic side of risk management. It's not just thinking about whether we will be disrupted, as in that being a huge risk, but it's also how do I disrupt?
Exactly.
And then you're still talking about the same underlying phenomena, but you're thinking about it from a strategic context. But then if we really think about just the negative side of risk management, what can happen to us? And if something is already happening and the company is suffering, loss making, laying off people, everything is falling on top of you. And then you sort of have a few alternative ways of behaving. One is being open. You engage people. Let's think about the risks going forward, different scenarios, how do we survive, what bad can happen. And people will even have to face the possibility of a bankruptcy, perhaps. Okay, bankruptcy, how could it happen? What would be the first steps that would lead us to bankruptcy from where we are today? What can we do right now to not take that first step?
Interesting.
What action can we take? Sometimes
reverse engineering, sort of the negative scenario.
Yeah, and for every step you think about mitigation. And the fact is that, the fact that you can talk about that means that it's not such a bad thing after all. It's not as likely, because people have this inbuilt feeling that if it would already be happening, they wouldn't dare talk about it.
True.
It's so scary that we can't even talk about it.
Yeah.
So we talk about it, it becomes less scary.
Yeah.
We take action to mitigate, to prevent, to reduce the likelihood. So people get something to do that will decrease the likelihood of that bad thing happening. They feel in control.
Yep.
The worst thing is that things are happening to you. It's much better when you are influencing yourself with your actions what will be happening.
Very interesting point. And that makes me think that when the leadership, whenever they have a challenging topic to talk about, why not to transfer that into risk and make the staff to assess that risk and manage that risk, in a sense. That why to, too much ponder about the risks or the challenges yourself in the leadership team or executive committees, etc. Because I think that everybody at the end of the day probably feel and understand that there are risks in the air.
And often the people lower in the organization may even know more about what's already happening than people in the top management.
Exactly.
And these kinds of collaborative processes can be a way for the management to realize what everyone else already knew.
Yeah. Every now and then we often in the risk assessments we differentiate the answers based on the leadership team and the others. And then we see is the leadership more optimistic or pessimistic in their general assessments. And oftentimes when they are a little bit more pessimistic, that's a good thing, because then they are unsettled about the things, they think that there's risks realizing and so on. But if they are actually less worried about the risks than their staff, then they have to stop and think what is going on and ask and really read what the staff is writing about the risks and understand then.
Yeah. But I really think, as I said, that we have gotten a wake-up call on the need to understand these chains of consequences with COVID-19, which has step by step changed the way we live our lives at the moment.